I'm sure that anyone who is an NBA fan has idolized certain players growing up, whether it's because they're the player that's creating the most buzz, maybe they're the best player from your local team, or perhaps even the best player in the entire league. Regardless of what that reason is, we all have at least one player that has inspired us to love the NBA, and these players have the responsibility of being a heroic role model for the general public. However, some of these athletes play the role of the greatest villain instead. In this series, we'll take a look at some of the NBA's most despised players, whether it's because they didn't get along with teammates or concerning off-the-court issues that cause fans to turn on said player. I will review why this player is hated, share stories from other players and coaches about them, and determine whether the criticism is fair or not. So, without further ado, let's discuss today's player. Rick Barry, the man who inspired this series. He's mostly known by today's fans as the guy who shot free throws like everybody's 90-year-old grandmother would. And he was making them too, but we're not going to get into that. But don't let that unorthodox style fool you into thinking this man wasn't getting buckets on a night-by-night basis. Rick Barry has a season of averaging over 35 points per game. To put into perspective of just how rare that is, the only other players to achieve this have been Kobe Bryant in 2006, James Harden in 2019, Michael Jordan in 1987, and I can't forget about Wilt Chamberlain, because he's got as many 35-point per game seasons as everyone else on this list combined. But for Rick Barry to be added into this exclusive club says a lot about who he was as a scorer. You couldn't deny Barry's talent on the court, but he wasn't a very likable guy, as multiple teammates of Barry complained about him being selfish, arrogant, and condescending, among other things. As in Bill Simmons' Book of Basketball, he obtained a quote from former Warriors Executive Vice President Ken Macker when he said, "You'll never find a bunch of players sitting around talking about the good old days with Rick. His teammates and his opponents thoroughly detested him." So that's a quote right there that perfectly describes how Barry's peers thought of him. But let's now figure out why they thought this. Real quick, if you've watched up to this point, I thank you. And if you could, just please take 1 second out of your day to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me out, and I would thank you for life. So, anyway, now back to the video. Number 1. Rick Barry's decision to jump ship to the ABA in 1967. After an unbelievable sophomore year of averaging over 35 points per game, Barry led his Warriors to the NBA Finals, where they would lose to Wilt Chamberlain and the Philadelphia 76ers in 6 games. Not to the fault of Barry, though, who averaged over 40 a game in this series. The future was looking bright for the Warriors, who, in addition to Barry, also had a 26-year-old Nate Thurmond in the prime of his career, a 25-year-old Jeff Mullins, who would eventually develop into a 3-time All-Star, and a 25-year-old Fred Hetzel, who was the first pick in the draft just 2 years earlier and was showing some signs of possible potential. But this wouldn't happen though, as Rick Barry, who was on an expiring contract, accepted an offer for $70,000 over 3 years with the Oakland Oaks of the ABA. Barry would also be given 15% ownership and profits, estimating Barry's actual contract to be worth about $500,000. And the problem is that back in these days, there was a reserve clause in players' contracts that give the team the option of bringing back said player. So, Barry challenged the reserve clause in court 2 years before Curt Flood even challenged it in baseball, which is honestly nuts that Barry doesn't get more credit for this. But that's most likely because he lost the case, so he was forced to either play for the Warriors or sit out the 67-68 season. And that's exactly what he did before joining the ABA in 1968. When Barry challenged the reserve clause, everyone thought he was being greedy, as back then, the highest salaries you would see guys make would be about $100,000 a year, roughly, or in Wilt Chamberlain's case, about $200,000. So for Rick Barry to be making 5 times as much as some of the other highest paid players in the league was just absolutely absurd at the time, and people didn't really like that very much. But can you really blame Rick Barry though? When you're offered that much money, why wouldn't you take it? Obviously, this is a decision that was going to get a lot more hate back in the 60s than it would today, because, I mean, free agency wasn't even around back then, so to see your team's best player jump ship to a different league was actually unheard of at that time. Definitely gets way too much hate for this. Number 2, he allegedly gave up on his team in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. Now, this is not 100% confirmed, but there has been some evidence that suggests this theory. The year is 1976, and it's the Western Conference Finals. The Warriors, who were the defending champions, get even better this year and see themselves going head-to-head with the 42-40 Phoenix Suns. The Suns had a decent roster, but overall, they were seen as the far inferior team to the Warriors, so it was surprising to see this series even going to 7 games. And just 2 minutes into that Game 7, Rick Barry got into a fight with Suns guard Ricky Sobers. And as you can see, none of Barry's teammates are very eager to jump in for the save. At halftime, Barry watched the tape of the fight and noticed none of his teammates were trying to defend him, and this supposedly angered Barry so much that he went full Ben Simmons mode and flat out refused to shoot the ball in the second half, going scoreless in the third quarter and scoring just 4 in the fourth. The Warriors would end up losing the game, and the blame was placed onto Rick Barry. Rick Barry has obviously denied these rumors, but that doesn't mean that he didn't do it. And in my opinion, I do think that Barry quit offensively, especially in the third quarter, as he didn't even attempt a shot. However, if you watch that second half closely, you'll also notice that the Warriors really aren't looking to get the ball to Barry either. Like, I saw Rick get open at least 4 to 5 times, and none of his teammates even looked in his direction. Especially Phil Smith, who on one play pulled up from mid-range, had his shot immediately blocked back into his own hands, and then instantly took another pull-up shot just to get blocked again. All while Rick Barry was standing wide open on the wing. Number 3, the Bill Russell comments. After Rick Barry retired from the league in 1980, he went on to become an analyst for CBS, and while he was calling Game 5 of the 1981 NBA Finals, he made some not-so-friendly remarks about Bill Russell.
I gotta show you, after our next break in the action, a picture we have, and I don't know if any of you guys will recognize who it is. I'm gonna wait and let you be in suspense about it. And Rick, who do you think that guy is there?
I don't know. It looks like some fool over there with that big watermelon grin on the left.
All right.
Who is that guy?
That's you, Bill. Don't you recognize that picture?
Nope.
There's
another one. Who's that guy with that funny-looking hat on?
That's the United States Olympic team.
That's right. 1956 in Melbourne.
I know I've given Barry the benefit of the doubt for a majority of this video so far, but that stops with this clip. I mean, just look at Bill's face after those comments from Barry. That basically shows you everything you need to see right there. Number 4, Rick Barry's decision to leave the Virginia Squires. Over the past couple years, we've seen multiple stars demand trades from their teams, and some of these players don't really handle it in the most professional way. But what Rick Barry did to force his way out of the Virginia Squires easily takes the cake. Going back to 1968, when Rick Barry was eligible to play with the Oakland Oaks, he only played 1 season with the team before they relocated to Washington the next year. Barry wasn't particularly fond about playing in Washington and immediately signed a 5-year contract to return to the Golden State Warriors. The only problem is that he wouldn't be eligible to play for them until 1972. So he figured he could stick it out in Washington until then, but then the next season they relocated to Virginia, and this was where Barry drew the line. Rick Barry had no intention of playing in Virginia, and he forced his way out by insulting the entire state when he announced that Virginia was a state he had always gotten out of as soon as he could, and that he considered it his duty to protect his 3-year-old son from picking up the contagious disease known as a Southern accent. Needless to say, he was traded to the New York Nets shortly after. Now, this is completely unprofessional on Barry's part, and he could have handled this in a much more mature way, so Barry deserves all the hate for this decision, but hey, at least it worked, so I will say that. Number 5. What did teammates think about Rick Barry? Look, I can talk about Rick Barry all I want, But the fact is that I've never met the guy, so let's hear some quotes from guys who actually played with them and see what they thought about Barry. NBA Hall of Famer Robert Parrish, who played his first 2 seasons with Rick on the Warriors, said he had a bad attitude, like he was always looking down at you. Mike Dunleavy Sr. said that Rick Barry would literally start World War III if he had that kind of power. But my favorite quote comes from Billy Pultz, who said in the 1980 season when they were both on the Houston Rockets, that a team psychologist came to the locker room to give the team a visual exercise where everyone would close their eyes and imagine all of their issues being placed into a bag and being thrown off a bridge until they finally disappear. When the psychologist counts to 3, everyone will open their eyes and all of their troubles will be gone. Well, Pultz opened his eyes and said, "Hey Rick, I don't get it. How come you're still here?" The team bursted into laughter and Rick did not appreciate that joke. Now, Pultz and Barry were actually friends and played together in the ABA, but Billy knew how difficult it was to get along with Rick, and he knew everyone else saw him as that arrogant, self-entitled prick who just shot granny free throws. And it's crazy that now over 40 years later, and that's still how we remember Rick Barry. We don't remember the amazing things he did, like in 1975 when he pulled off maybe the biggest carry job of all time by leading this disgusting roster to an NBA championship, where his best teammate was a rookie Jamal Wilkes, who averaged a whopping 11 points per game in those finals. Or the fact that Barry retired with the highest career free throw percentage of all time, and to this day still sits at 4th place on that list. Keep in mind that Rick Barry played in the 60s and 70s, where shooting styles were still evolving and are nowhere near as advanced as they are today. For reference, here are the top 30 players with the highest career free throw percentages. And here are all the players who played in Barry's era or before his era. That's a pretty exclusive list. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter all that much, because Rick Barry's ego and attitude will always have him remembered as one of the NBA's most hated players. I hope you all enjoyed the video. My name is T Pointer, and I'll see you guys next time.